What's going on, everybody? This is Hightower. I'm back. It's my second episode, and really liking how this is going. I'm getting hopefully better with every episode. I'm learning a lot. But this is Hightower versus the Reebok deal in UFC. I'll figure out the appropriate title for it. But the discussion today is really going to be about Zuffa, the UFC, and the recent deal with Reebok, which has caused, needless to say, a lot of controversy within the industry, amongst fighters, amongst fans, just the general MMA universe has obviously been talking about this for a while. It's a subject pretty much for hardcore fans and people involved with the business. But it's an interesting topic. It's been highly debated. Majority of the fans seem to be on the side of the fighters rather than Zuffa or the UFC brass. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about it, give you my take on it, and hopefully we'll have some comments and some feedback down at the bottom. Please subscribe. Really appreciate it. But the first thing I just want to talk about is the overall deal. The UFC struck this deal. And it's scheduled to go into effect in July, I believe. And basically what it means is that you're not going to be seeing random XYZ companies being labeled on a fighter shorts or on a fighter shirt or on the banners that they have behind them as they're being introduced by Bruce Buffer. You're not going to see that anymore. It's basically just going to be Reebok and a couple of other major sponsors, and that's really it. From an aesthetic standpoint, some people would say, man, this is a more cleaned up version of where these fighters really, how they need to look in the ring. I think there's a sentiment maybe amongst UFC and maybe amongst the mainstream sports that this is still a niche sport. It's still done in backyards and bar rooms, and it's weird to say, but I think people still kind of have that notion. And when you have XYZ advertisements all over you, whether it's Dude Wipes or Dynamic Fastener or, just name any XYZ clothing company, equipment company, the thing is that people say that you start to look like a NASCAR driver. And so I think the UFC's approach was to get more of a consolidated advertisement with bigger name brands sharing the spotlight and only the spotlight. And also, I know that they said they wanted to eliminate some of the hassles that fighters were having in collecting money from advertisers and things of that nature. Now, where this is a little bit tricky, and I'm not a lawyer by any means, but I know that, sorry, just adjusting the camera. I know that, when it comes to the legalities of it, the UFC fighters are really contracted fighters. As opposed to the NFL, as opposed to Major League Baseball, NBA, where you're an independent contractor, but not really. You sign to play for a team, and there's unions involved. There's a players' association involved. You have those sorts of things to bargain on your behalf, and the UFC really doesn't have that with its fighters. It's really what the UFC says pretty much goes, and the fighters are kind of just left to fend for themselves. So, this deal comes down. Obviously, there's a lot of blowback from fighters because of the amount of money that's going to be paid out. Originally, it was going to be on rankings, and then they realized that was kind of a very biased way to pay people out, and so they determined it would be on tenure, which has opened up a whole other can of worms as far as the women's division, as far as fighters who may have a pretty tenured career, maybe another organization have just signed with the UFC. They kind of have to start at the bare bottom. So there's a lot of controversy to it. This has sparked the talk again about a fighters union, which, it would be great for the fighters. I just don't know if it's going to happen. It would take, just to address that real quick, it would take somebody of a John Jones, a George St. Pierre, and Anderson Silva to literally not show up at a fight in protest to make some sort of change. Because if you're just a middle to lower tier guy, I'm not even going to name any names, but if you're a guy that has, not that many fights, and you're not that marketable, and you're not that promotable, we can move on without you. That's fine, But it's going to take a guy like a superstar to say enough's enough and to rally other fighters around. To me, it would be a sort of, you got UFC 190 coming up, and it would have to be getting all those fighters to say, we are not going to fight on that card unless we form a union and unless we tackle these issues that we have. It would take something like that for the UFC to stand up and notice. And I don't know if these fighters are willing to do that, quite honestly, man. I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, let's union up, let's rally, but, these guys have to pay bills. A lot of them are parents, a lot of them have kids, a lot of them are single income families. And, when you're fighting at the pinnacle organization in your respected sport, it's hard to say, you know what, I'm going to put my beliefs above my paycheck, I'm going to put my beliefs above the food I put on the table and the bills that I pay in order to make a change. I get that. It's tough. We all talk about, man, whatever your job is, we ought to rally together and make some changes. But at the end of the day, we're all people. We've all got to pay bills. We've all got to put food on the table. And I can see the difficulty in that. So it's hard to blame the fighters. I think that, a lot of times they take a lot of crap, and, it's hard to really blame them. I mean, these guys, the average athlete in the UFC can't be making more than $50,000 a year, except for your elite superstars. Obviously, they're making pretty good paychecks. But it's hard to get those guys, the middle tier to lower tier guys who aren't making that much a year, to rally up and fight the man, when that man is the only thing that's providing you a check. And really, now that the Reebok deal is in effect and it's eliminating a lot of those other sponsors, I mean, you really are caught in a bind here. So as far as the Reebok deal, it is based on a 10-year system. The amount of fights that you have basically determines the amount of pay that you have from the Reebok deal. And obviously the disparity comes where fighters who are used to making much higher paydays on sponsors before the Reebok deal are finding a big gap in between that. Brennan Schaub, for example, various other fighters. I think Chad Mendez was mentioned. A few of the other middle to upper, pretty well-known fighters have aired their grievances. Ryan Jimmo, I think, has made some noise about that. And you look at the women's aspect too. I mean, Sarah McMahon went on Helwani's show the other day, and it really presented a lot of facts to her argument that women are really being, I wouldn't say taken advantage of, but are just not being allowed the equal ability to earn the money that some of the other men fighters are. So there's that case too. So bottom line, this is a very big can of worms for the UFC. I don't know how they're going to solve it. I have a feeling the market's going to correct itself in some sort of way. And when I mean that, I mean that Bellator is going to come along and say, hey guys, we're allowing all these sponsors. We're allowing you to go get your sponsors. We're going to allow you to be entrepreneurial and be capitalistic in a capitalistic society and go after those sponsors on your own. We're not going to impede that. Now, maybe down the road, that becomes another thing, too, for Bellator to look at when they get bigger with Viacom, but that is a huge selling point for Bellator, and it only takes a couple of superstars to leave UFC to go to Bellator before everything starts to crumble a little bit. Now, I have a feeling if you're a superstar, a budding superstar in the UFC, and you're upset about this Reebok deal, and you're on your last fight, and you're on your way up the ranks, I'm not going to name any names, but because I don't know the contract situation, but if you're a guy who is in that situation, your bargaining power, to me at least, would seem to be pretty high, because you have Bellator on one hand, it's owned by Viacom, tons of money backing. Scott Coker's in charge now. We know he's going to bring that organization to heights it's never been before. But now you also have another option, a competitive option to leave to, who's offering you all these sponsors and options that you do not have with UFC. So there is that, and I think the UFC is something they're going to have to address. Now, my theory is that they're going to get those guys right before they leave. They're going to say, wait a second. XYZ fighter, we know, you have one fight left. We know you're a top 10 guy or a top 15 guy. We know Bellator is offering you what it's offering you. We'll make a special deal. We know that this is what the tiering system says, but we'll find a way to make you happy and overcome that with pay that's going to make you forget about the Reebok deal altogether. I mean, especially if it's somebody who they feel is somebody who has a really potential, like a good future. Not somebody like a Phil Davis who, went over to Reebok, and UFC didn't pursue him that much. And I think it was more just the marketability, the just the style of fighter Phil Davis is, that just really made them say, fine, go ahead. But it's going to take a guy who is marketable, who is a potential superstar, for them to maybe make some changes. But I still find Zuffa finding a way, UFC finding a way to stick to their guns and kind of grin and bear it. And if they lose a couple guys, they lose a couple guys. But it seems like they're pretty firm on their stance. I mean, they obviously are smart guys. They've obviously had their lawyers look at it, their accountants, a million times over. At least hopefully they did. Hopefully they did their due diligence. But it just seems like they're going to stick with what they're doing. So it's hard to see any kind of major changes unless there's just a big mass exodus at some point. So that being said, is this good or bad? I mean, obviously, if you're a fighter, it's not good. If you're the UFC, it's good, just from the fact that you're not going to have to. You're going to pay these guys less than what they would have normally made, and you keep one sponsor on their shorts. You make it consolidated. You make it a little bit more professional looking, which, in my opinion, it really doesn't translate to mixed martial arts. If you're trying to be the NFL or the NBA or the Major League Baseball or hockey, this isn't that. This isn't that. This is really an independent fighter or independent athlete type of an organization. So it's hard to say, man, we want everybody consolidated and wearing the same, because everybody's not the same. This is not team Cowboys or Team Raiders or whoever. This is, you're on your own. You are your team. So to restrict guys from being able to advertise as they see please, it's not good. And the UFC has been in a great position for a while, meaning that they don't have to answer to a lot of these issues because there's just no competition out there. And that was the thing about Strikeforce, Pride, and hopefully Bellator, is that it did provide that competition. It made the UFC step their game up. So with that not being there, it really takes away a lot of the bargaining power for the athletes. And it's, just from a pay standpoint, everybody knows, when your pay is getting cut, whether it's been at your job or a job loss or whatever, obviously it's a huge impact on your life. And it ultimately, and I'll kind of close with this, but this, as far as the future outlook, it may deter the progress of the sport. If you're an athlete, you're in high school, you can jump out of the gym, you can lift everything under the sun, and you have an option to go to football or another sport, team sport that makes money, versus going into MMA where the salaries are good if you're top fighter, but you're going to be restricted as far as your own ability to make money outside of your contract. What's to say you wouldn't just go into football or hockey or basketball or whatever else? So I think that it hurts the overall progress of the sport. I think it looks good in a way, but I don't think that really aesthetically, I don't think that has much of it's more of a noise versus the signal, or signal versus the noise. Just don't think UFC realizes that MMA is not those sports. It's its own thing, and embrace that it's its own thing. Embrace that it's a niche sport. Embrace all the fun and the pageantry that comes with it, as opposed to trying to make it XYZ sport. So we'll see. This is a huge deal for them. We're going to see in the next year or so what's going to happen with this. I assume there will be some changes, but you never know. Dana and Lorenzo and those guys, they seem pretty confident in what they're doing. They seem pretty tight-lipped, and they seem pretty stubborn about their stance. So I don't see it changing. The only thing I would see that could make a change is a mass exodus of fighters, which I think the UFC will curtail a bit, or Bellator just snagging up and using this to advantage. But could be a weeding out process for the UFC too. That is one thing also, is that this could be a way for them to trim the roster a little bit, which I know they probably want to do considering the loss that they had last year. That is it. That's my take on the Reebok UFC situation. Like I said, please leave comments, feedback, hopefully somewhat positive. I'm still learning as I go, and I appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.